when young people come over for more cerebral events. Members are not very fond of that generally. So thank you so much for being here. I feel very happy to be able to talk about two varying perspectives on a historic moment. Very, very sad, and I think not commonly spoken about moment. It's a little forgotten part of history. So I'm very happy to bring two lenses, one of fact and one of fiction, to shine a little light on why they chose this moment to express through their art. Thank you, Ram.
Thank you, Ritika.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for spending the time and the energy and coming here on. You're all very cerebral people. I can see that.
So, Ram, I think I'm going to start with you.
Oh, gosh.
As a filmmaker, what compelled you to choose the Jallianwala Massacre as a subject of Waking of the Nation? What made this moment feel cinematic to you?
Okay, so, you know what you want to say, you hope that that pain point that you have, that you want to speak about, you hope that culture and people will also have the same pain point. So you're constantly trying to culturally piggyback onto a larger conversation. Otherwise, nobody will see your work or nobody will read your work. So you're constantly trying to figure out how to say something that people want to listen. So what had happened to me many years ago, and I've said this before, but I was traveling on this plane to London with my mother, and so we were in economy class. This was many years ago, and my mother was on the other side and I was on this side. And when after the flight took off, my mother said, "Come and meet me." And hello. So no, please, it's good. Thank you for coming. So I was traveling economy. I was just explaining a story that why I started this is because we were traveling to London with my mother, and I was on this side, my mother was on the other side, and my mother, after the flight took off, said, "Come and meet me." So I went forward, and obviously you're intimidated because it's your first time abroad, and you know you're intimidated by the very idea of flying, by the air hostess, you know, by all of this that comes at you. And so when I went in front, the curtain of the kitchen, which I now know is called a galley, so it was closed. So that front row, where there's a little more jaga because of that baby car seat and all that. So there was a white man there, and I said, "Excuse me, sir, could I go across?" And he looked at me and he said, "Sit down, you brown bastard."
On a plane?
On a flight. And I actually went and sat down and I started shaking because I couldn't understand how anybody could speak to me like that. It has taken me, this was many years ago, it has taken me many years to reply to that man. This was, then I have to admit my age. If I tell you, man, you can't ask a man his age.
This is not the Q&A.
No, this was on British Airways, and I was going to London, and so it meant it happened many years ago. It did happen 2 years ago, and so what happened was that I went and sat down, and the idea of racism, prejudice, humiliation, the white man's burden, superiority, and the idea that they came to civilize us. And the very fact that I even now speak in English and that I have been colonized in my clothing. Reenita here has not been colonized in her clothing.
No colonization.
She's wearing a sari, she's fine. So this was the reason that I wanted to speak about this, and so I won't now hog the mic any further. But this was, so now over to your next question.
Ritika.
Yeah.
I find it very fascinating because I feel like regardless of how old you are, everyone sort of has some kind of anecdotal experience of their sort of intersection with colonialism or imperialism, because we experience the repercussions of it to this very day. Like we said, from our clothing, from the way that we speak, from our own sort of prejudice towards our own language and our own culture. It's very sad, but our minds have been colonized.
Yeah, sab gore bacche che. All you parents out there, you better make sure that your kids are white. Okay, listen, that's a joke, okay?
We have you on camera. So.
We're on camera. I can't say that. That becomes now, Ram said all children should be white.
Reenita, what inspired you to weave the Jallianwala Bagh massacre into an interfaith love story in Vermillion Harvest? And how did this emotional narrative help humanize a national tragedy for you?
Oh, that is so many questions in one. I've had this story in my head and in, part of my DNA for some 35 years. It usually doesn't take me that long to write a book. The opposite. But this one has just been evolving and evolving and evolving. I did a book club session with Anurag and Ekta a while ago. They asked me a similar question. And I was a young child in the 11th standard in school. This is my math teacher from those days. This is my special guest, by the way. Rama and MS Raghunathan. She's my math teacher. And her husband is a Padma Shri. I have to say that because that is just the highest honor. I was in a play, I don't know if you remember, when I was in the 11th standard, and it was also set against this tragedy, the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And my mother, who is the lady in the mosque, one of the ladies in the mosque there, she's seen me in many plays. My life has been fairly theatrical, even on a daily basis at home. It just happens that way. And she said to me, I've seen you in this play, that play, the other play, but in that particular role, I swear to God, you were at Jallianwala Bagh in a past life. Which is a little bit of a voodoo thing to say, but it's the person who made the most impact upon me as a young child was my grandfather, her dad. And he was a young boy who passed by the entrance of Jallianwala Bagh a few days after the massacre and saw this pile of chappals, slippers that had been stacked up, and it left such an impression upon him, such a strong visual. That's a story he carried down to us. And actually in LA, 3 weeks ago, at another book club, unanimously everyone said the first thing that really struck me was that visual of the pile of slippers. Some Indian people, a lot of non-Indian people, Americans, but they were like, that really got to them, of all the things. So it was a combination of all of these. And then to me, round about that same time when I was in the 11th standard, a really good friend of mine said to me, you've got to read this story. Bear with me because I know you don't like romances, but it's called Love Story by Eric Segal. And I was like, what is wrong with you? Why would you tell me to read a book that is titled Love Story when you know I'm not into that? And she said, no, but this one you're going to have to read because you are going to fall in love with it. And she was spot on. I fell in love with Love Story, an epic love story, and said to myself around then that, one day I want to write an epic love story as well. Years later, I saw Titanic. Epic love story, And this is, I sort of sell this as Titanic meets Gandhi, loosely, And Fault in Our Stars, young adult. I write a lot of young adult. Another epic love story. Interestingly enough, it sort of all came together for me, and I realized that a romance and a love story are two different things. A love story is not a romance because it doesn't fit the romance formula, and that's just fine.
Can you tell us how it is different?
A romance, which, by the way, for lovers of books and stories, in America at least, I can say, I'm not sure about India, Trupti maybe, or Ekta, you could tell us, or Anurag, biggest selling category in the reading market. But a romance meets a formula. It has to end in happily ever after or happy for now. And I've been asked actually about this book, but could you have spun it a different way? And I was like, well, yeah. Could you just spin anything a different way?
A love story can be a tragedy.
Yes. Including Love Story by Eric Segal.
Yeah, it was remade over here with Ranjita, the actress. So after the Love Story was made with Ryan O'Neal, and then it was remade over here.
But I think that really impacted me and stuck in my head. I was like, okay, a love story, that doesn't have a happy ending. Okay. Therein lies, what will come to fruition one day. I didn't quite say it like that, but that was a thought.
And about it being an interfaith love story.
Yes.
Very interesting at a time where I quite like to describe India as the land of competing religions. Because today it's about whose religion can be the biggest and the loudest. And my friend very comedically says that actually I think the problem is that Bhagwan Mera hai. Because we all need to scream and shout at him for him to hear us.
Yeah.
And it's where in very dystopian times. So the interfaith love story is very interesting.
Yeah, and I must say, we've done in film, in books, in stories here, many times the idea of a Hindu-Muslim couple. I've taken it a little bit beyond that. My protagonist is Anglo-Indian. I just want to repeat that word, Anglo-Indian. I have grown up in a super traditional Punjabi family which has used the word Anglo-Indian with complete distaste. I mean, complete distaste. To the point where as a child I could not really understand why. Years later, I was a journalist, I was working on public radio, and I interviewed an Anglo-Indian young man. It was supposed to be about his music, and yes, I did interview him about his music, but I was just fascinated by his backstory and the baggage that he carried, not just him, his entire community, and what they had faced. The complete distaste, as I say, both from the English as well as from the Indians, literally having no place in society. And that stuck with me for years when I was thinking about, what a young girl, age 18, in Amritsar in 1919 would face, the struggles, the challenges that she would have. A regular Punjabi girl, regular, whatever that means, would not be able to go out and move freely in society. My Anglo-Indian protagonist can get away with that because she's Anglo-Indian and she's already resigned to the fact that, I'm not going to be accepted anyway. People are going to think I'm outlandish anyway, so I'll do what I like anyway, and then you put that together with her, Muslim lover. She's outcast, he's outcast, there's struggle all along, and I just wanted to put that across. It was very important to me.
Wow, I feel like the common thread between what we both sort of spoke about is that both of these stories are deeply personal and they come from a sense of empathy towards something outside of yourself or within yourself. So thank you for bringing these two bits of art and culture into the world. I think they're very important. Back to you, Ram. What drew you to explore the Jallianwala Bagh massacre through the episodic format of a web series rather than a film or documentary? And what unique opportunities did this format offer?
You have a mic.
Money. No, I'm just kidding. No. There's no money to be made. No. There isn't actually. Also, there's no IP. But I think when Amita, my co-producer, is here, so yes. So when we were speaking about what is the best way to bring this out, and one of the people that we were in constant conversations with was Shogoto, who's in Sony Live. And at that time, we had just finished Arya, and he was first in Disney Plus Hotstar, then when HBO was meant to come into India. So we then spoke to him at HBO. And he and Sanyukta, who was my writer from Nirja, and there was Vinod Iyer, who was one of our producers in Equinox. And so they all three happened to be at HBO. So when we spoke to them about this, and we did the whole reading, and since that time, Shogoto has been a great believer and a great, this is probably the right time for him to enter. He should.
He's supposed to be dropping in.
Yeah, exactly. So, but he's the guy who actually, Shogoto also introduced Reenita and me together. So
Yeah.
and I made sure that this happened today. But so we didn't. You see, if you are to make a movie like now, Kesari 2 is coming out tomorrow,
Yeah.
which is also on Jallianwala Bagh. And I remember reading the book on Shankaran Nair at that time. But I feel that there are certain, sort of, how shall I say, aesthetics. There are certain choices that you have to make if you have to reach out to a certain audience. And I felt that with Shogoto and the team there, I would be safe in the worldview that they had. And so that was one of the reasons that we chose to make it as a series. It's a lot of the time it's the people that partner you on the journey that you're on, and we felt this was a safe parking spot.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a follow-up question. Was there a specific audience that you were looking to cater to?
So, like, one of the things that we try and do is what we say is we reach out to Klasa Ji and Mosa Ji. Okay, so and from Nirja to Arya, we've managed to reach out, and sometimes they say, Ram, you're doing 4-quadrant work. Okay, and so that's a term that I learned when I was doing Nirja, which is young, old, male, female. And then I said, okay, but what about the north, south, and that's 6-quadrant? And then I said, what about international and Indian, and that's 8-quadrant? And then as soon as you make a 10-quadrant, then you are probably making something which has 10 heads. So I made. So I want to reach out, but I want to reach out in a way in which I can tightrope walk both Klasaji and Masaji, and sometimes I'm not able to. Sometimes I don't succeed. But it is one of the rare companies that I think have managed with the content that we make, and content is a bad word today, but with whatever that we are putting out, we're making sure that we penetrate. Yeah. And like they say, from Kolaba to Kandivali. So however, I think when you're making a movie, I think that you do need to have certain things in your head. Yeah. Starcast is one of them. Because your return of investment is purely based on who you're going to cast. And with this, one of the things that we told Shogoto also is that we'd like to make it with people who are relatively new. Obviously, people know Taruk Raina and Nikita and Sahil, but relatively newer people who are right for that role. And I feel that if I was to make it into a movie, then I would have had to get into how do I make it poster worthy? Yeah. How do I sell it? And with this, I think it was a little more pure. Not to say that that is impure, but that would mean that I would have had to look at certain other commercial possibilities, which is fair. So,
I think it's. I mean, not that I've ever made a movie, but I do think that it's difficult to create something that transcends across so many demographics, but history is just one of those things that's for everyone. Everyone has a feeling of belonging. Everyone has a feeling of, like a knowing or some attachment to our history. And I think everyone has a different lens and a different perspective and views it differently. So I do think that while it's a very vast subject that can transcend demographic, it's also a difficult one because it does, appeal to so many people in so many different ways. Has the response that you've gotten echoed this sentiment in any way?
Do you
ask me?
Yeah, first, know me? Okay. I think Arya has penetrated more. Nirja has penetrated more. The Waking of a Nation, by the very choice of its title, at one point we said, and we thought about it being the Waking of a Nation from the time we were writing it. 6 months ago, I got scared because I said, yeah, nobody's going to watch The Waking of a Nation, okay? Nobody knows this title. So I went to Sony and I said, guys, let's call it Sazish, okay, which is conspiracy. And Sazish is a title because titles are horrible things, okay, as everybody knows who's in the publishing business, in the movie business. Titles are impossible, okay. To get a title it can take you like, a long, long time. And you wanted that title to hit out. So Sony was very sweet. They said, yeah, if you want to call it Sazish, you can call it Sazish, it's not a problem. And then everybody that I was saying, Ram, what an 80s title, what's wrong with you? I said, nahi, lekin ye title chalegi, ye title chalega, okay? Logo ko pata chalega Sazish picture kya hai. Because Waking of a Nation, I mean, I was asking people when I was in Dehradun, they said, acha, Arya ke baad aap kya bana rahe ho? I said, ek series hai, Waking of a Nation. I said, sorry, kya? So then I said, I'll call it Mitti. Then I said, we'll call it Amritsar. Then we said, you know what, let's research the title. Okay, and we hadn't researched the show, but we researched the title. And so we went out there and we went to Ormax and we said, okay, can we just, do a... And then they got back and they said, yeah, jo bhi title hai, it's all fine. So we said, okay, in which case, if somebody is saying 70%, somebody else is saying 72%. So we said, then in fact, Sony said, Ram, just be pure. Just call it The Waking of a Nation. That's what you wanted to call it. Just go out there and call it. But I have a feeling that a title does, sort of create its own barriers and its own invitations.
Yeah.
And even now, I don't know whether I should have called it something else, because even now I feel it's a little bombastic. I love the title, but I don't know how many people will actually go out there and say, Sir, aapka series maine dekha. वो क्या था क्या कुछ नेशन के बारे में कुछ था ना. So
I think it's an epic guide.
Listen.
It's far better
I'm
than
talking to
Sazish.
somebody I'm talking to somebody who's called her book Vermillion Harvest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a different reason for that, but I actually think
Would you
that.
like us?
Yeah, please tell us. Because listen, there's no way I could have called what I was doing Vermillion Harvest.
Well, yeah, there's metaphor upon metaphor. There's a reason why it's called Vermillion Harvest. But I actually think your title is spot on. Spot on. Because what people don't know or don't realize is that the Jallianwala Bagh incident is the single incident that really spurred our independence movement. So of course it's the Waking of a Nation.
It is, yeah.
There were two sort of failed mutinies before that, 1857, and then after that the Gadar movement, which some people know about and others don't, and it was actually headquartered in San Francisco where I live. Which is, I think, going to be the topic of a future book. I'm just fascinated by the whole thing. But so I think it's spot on, Waking of a Nation.
No, we love it, by the way. Amita and me think, and everybody in our team, a lot of the people are here today, we all think that is the right title.
Yes.
But, and we are very proud of the title, but at the same time, I have the responsibility of wearing various hats, and the producer hat, and the marketing hat, and the distribution hat, and the creator hat, and the director hat. And in trying to straddle all these hats, sometimes one person is not as happy as the other.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't call it Sazish or Amritsar.
I also feel like the literary world is probably more forgiving with titles. So why Vermillion Harvest?
Yeah, the literary world is not forgiving about anything, and when it comes to titles and covers, I mean, it makes you or breaks you. That whole adage about don't judge a book by its cover is complete nonsense. Okay? Everybody judges a book by its cover.
I always do.
Yep, you better have the cover right. And it's interesting because this book has been published in the West first, last year, with a totally different cover. It's the same book, totally different cover. And then Jayco said, we're not doing that cover. We're going to do a different cover. So there was much exchange. Trupti's laughing away. She will validate about the cover and about how we won't go into the details, but there was, just suffice it to say, there was a lot of conversation. And unanimously, everybody here has said, we like this Indian edition cover better. It is so much better than the other cover. And, so there's something in it. I am not qualified. I'm not a graphic designer.
Dare we ask which cover do you prefer?
I'm bad with titles. I'm bad with covers. I will never get a job as a copywriter.
She just took the safe way out, huh?
No,
You could have
it's
easily
the
told us,
honest truth.
everybody's over here knowing that you prefer the Firan cover. No, I'm just kidding.
I have killed all my darlings. It's the only way to survive. But so back to that play, you know, in the 11th standard, that was actually, my subtitle is called Playtime at the Bog, and that play was called Playtime at the Bog. So
Nice.
originally I was thinking, you know, about that as a title, but then people think it's a children's story, you know, about how you're playing in the bagicha, so, which is not the case. Vermillion harvest it's metaphorical. So this massacre took place on April 13th. It was Vaisakhi that day. Vaisakhi is our spring harvest festival, when the colors come to life and the world comes to life, and you know. So vermilion is the color. That's actually a lot. It's the color of blood. It's the color of life. So talking about the harvest festival first, right? The life. So vermilion and the harvest, right? Vermilion is also sindoor, right? What a bride applies. Okay, so it signifies a bride, it signifies marriage, it signifies that passion. And why? Again, because it's the color of blood and the color of life. And these are the things, you know, for a bride and, you know, sort of in that very early stage of marriage that are significant and important. So vermilion, harvest, but this is also the harvesting of the waking of our nation. So hence Vermillion harvest. It's got a few different meanings, they all come together, and thank gosh for the fact that you did not call this Amritsar.
Well, actually our first title, when I was thinking about it 5 years ago, it was called The Making of a Nation. Okay, and then Shatrujit Nath, who's one of our co-writers, Shantanu Srivastava and Shatrujit Nath are the co-writers of this. And so then Shatrujit decided that let's call it The Waking of a Nation rather than The Making of a Nation. Shyam Benegal's last film, Jibul Rahman, which was the... So I'm happy I didn't call it The Making of a Nation.
Yeah.
It wasn't though. I think what Reenita said was spot on, that it was the Waking of a Nation,
Yeah.
because it mobilized Mahatma
Correct.
Gandhi, it mobilized all of these like, you know, cooperation movements and everything which all took place after
Yeah, in
this.
fact, the idea was that if, depending on how it penetrates and whether we get repeat purchase and all the rest of that, the idea was to make a whole bunch of, you know, sort of work about how India became India.
Yeah.
And so The Waking of a Nation, the next one was meant to be 1857, which also had a commission, which also had an investigation after the 1857, whatever, now they call it rebellion.
Yeah.
No,
Mutiny.
They used to, then when we were in school, they called it rebellion.
Now we just call teenagers.
Yeah, this was the wrong time, Shagato, because I spoke about you so nicely 5 minutes ago.
Here he is.
Now I have to repeat. Now I have to repeat all the nice things I said. Come.
By the way,
By-
everybody, that's Shogato. He's
Yeah.
the head of Sony Live.
Sony Live, and thanks to him that I'm sitting here today. So Shagato, thank you.
And
Yeah.
this may be a little known fact to you as well or to others, but Shogato was my first ever publisher of my first ever book published in India. So he comes from the publishing world, but he just like defected.
Thank God.
Really beautiful names, guys. I think they've landed exactly where they needed to be. Reenita, question for you. In writing about a real atrocity through a fictional lens, what were the ethical or emotional challenges you faced in maintaining historical integrity versus taking creative license?
Yeah, no ethical challenges, because every historical fact in the book is absolutely, you know, accurate. And that was important to me, because I don't know if there are rules in writing or rules in writing historical fiction, but I certainly did not want to write a story that was just set in a particular time period and blah-de-blah, right? There was a lot that happened. You know, if you actually track the events leading up to April 13th, there was so much that happened that could have turned into an event in and of itself, but that was somehow curbed, somehow prevented from igniting. There was a Ram Navami procession where the Hindus and the Muslims and the Sikhs were all marching and celebrating together and drinking from the same cup. There was, bomb threats. There was curfews happening. A stampede that happened. Some people died. They had to have, funerals. The funerals, but there was a curfew that everybody had to be at home by 2 p.m. How do you, with the Golden Temple here and, the crematoriums elsewhere, have Sikh, Muslim and Hindu funerals and have everything finished by 2 p.m.? It was a logistical nightmare, but we don't have an eye into these details.
It's all there in the series.
It is.
It's all there in the series. Yeah.
So it was important to really capture that and to see the build-up of the angst and the frenzy leading up to that day. So when it comes to historical accuracy, everything is 100% accurate. The love story is fictional. My characters, my protagonists are fictional. Aruna, her mother, Ayaz, Aruna's best friend Amrita, her husband Gurcharan Singh, fictional. But all of the British officers in the background, all of the references to Miss Sherwood was attacked, or these banks were burned and the names of the bankers, all of that is absolutely accurate, because what I wanted to do was take these fictional characters and place them in reality, place them in real scenes to explore how they might react. We don't know these stories. We have reports, we have facts that are given to us, and I will say that every single anecdote that we do know is the story of a man. We do not know about this from the perspective of a woman. And I really wanted to do that. That part was a challenge, so I had to take the creative license. But after really investigating, researching, talking to whoever I could who knew whatever they did sort of about this time, including just sort of where in Amritsar would you go for this or that, or, I think one of the biggest compliments I've gotten is, again, from that same LA book club about 3 weeks ago, where there was a lady in the audience and she was from Amritsar, and she said, I can tell that you have an inside view of Amritsar. Only somebody who has lived there and knows it distinctly would be able to write a book like this. And I'm from Bombay.
But I just want to speak for 2 minutes on something which is, so in the 1970s they had something called the New Journalism, okay, which was, they had all these writers called Thomas Wolfe, Hunter S. Thompson, and they started writing. Journalism was earlier meant to be objective, okay, and so they started writing something which is called fiction meets fact, and so they started calling it faction, okay, and during this time, like for instance, if one of those journalists, earlier they would say Muhammad Ali punched whatever George Foreman with his right, sort of hand, and it was a technical knockout, and that was what journalism was. And then suddenly all these people were writing in those magazines said, when Muhammad Ali put his right hand out to punch George Foreman, he remembered the breakfast that he had with his wife. And everybody was shocked because they said, how can a journalist go into his head? And what is this? And so the idea of entire rows in bookshops which are called historical fiction, I think is first of all like like something which is, when you're what is the right word for it, the anomaly, which is that when you're looking at it, you're saying, how can history be fiction? And then it is, obviously all history is fiction, and so what we've been received and all the rest of that. And so when I was looking at, like, I've read a lot of non-fiction, I've read about Hiroshima, etc., a lot of, and I like reading non-fiction. So the reason I decided to make it in a certain way, because it has a lot of news photography, a lot of articles, a lot of documentary footage, all of this is so that when you're watching it, you don't know what is fiction and you don't know what is fact. And that is in fact the nice thing about what you're doing, because constantly you're mixing it up. And also because we've not based it on, at least the Waking of a Nation is not based, it's a bit like, just like Reenita's, there's General Dyer is there and Michael O'Dwyer is there, etc. But all the other characters are fictional.
Right.
So if I was doing Nirja, then it's based on a particular person. But here it's not based on any, all the 4 friends are fictional. So then you're allowed, or at least I feel that I'm allowed. Other people may not feel that. Like I had a friend of mine who said, Ram, you've taken too many liberties, or you've taken, this is not the way. I said, but I'd like, and I didn't get into an argument. But yeah, you can easily get into arguments about this.
You don't know whether it's fact or fiction. That actually sounds like the news today. Which is, and I read this amazing little, I don't even know, like it's a meme, which basically said, if the news is so fake today, can you imagine how fake history is? And it is true, because history was always written by the victors, and it usually is these stories.
And you know who said that? Winston Churchill said that.
And actually, I just want to add to that. I'm really glad you said that, Ritika, because you're absolutely right. History is always written by the victors. And therein lies the opportunity for historical fiction, to sort of bring you history through a new lens, to bring you that historical story through the eyes of the minority, through the eyes of the woman, through the eyes of the subjugated, through the eyes of the Anglo-Indian, right? Because these are not the people that we have championed in our stories.
Yeah.
In fact, what happened was that when we casted 12 people from London, and they didn't know about Jallianwala Bagh. None of them knew about it.
Yes.
So when they read the script, they said, oh, this will be better. You know, why is it that this has not been taught in English schools?
Correct.
So if we don't speak about this, then, because they're not speaking about it, so we better speak about it.
A lot of them are taught that colonization was a good thing. Firstly, so I don't even want to get into what they believe about imperialism at all. My ex-boyfriend was half English, half Belgian. The first time I went to his countryside house, his dad very proudly showed me a map of British colonial times and all the places Britain had colonized. And I was just looking at it being like, I feel like I'm in a parallel universe right now. It's so
But
weird.
you know, one of the things that we put in the super in the beginning, which says once every 7 days, somebody in the world is celebrating independence from Great Britain. So that means there are a minimum of 52 countries that they went and colonized. They were colonizing, like that means, and so at the end of our show also, we've got all those flags. And you're watching those flags and you're saying, Acha Trinidad, Acha Tobago, Acha theek hai Canada tha, India tha, wo theek hai, but all of these, Dominican Republic, there's so many, Beirut, there's so many sort of countries that they went out there. How did they do this small island? I think they hated their food and they hated their weather.
And also, I think they were given a lot of help actually to conquer all of those other territories by our own people, because our Gurkhas and our Punjabis were their soldiers. If you look at World War I, you look at World War II, right? These are the people, and that's what the Gadar movement was based on, was let's incite their soldiers. Because they are our people, why are they working for the British? Let's incite them to revolt against them. You know, fascinating stories.
It's a tiny island, exactly, but like we said, they probably hated their food and weather. And they came to colonize us and they still have the shittiest food on earth. So I think it went very well. To you, Ram, what were some of the challenges, and I know you said you took some creative license, but what were some of the challenges in dramatizing such a sensitive chapter of history for a digital audience? And how did you approach recreating such a haunting historical moment while trying your best to honor its emotional truth?
Well, one of the things that we've not shown is the massacre, because I wanted to be respectful and responsible to what happened that day. So we've shown what happened in the commission. So even though the 4 characters are fictional, it's inspired by true events. We're not saying that this is based on true events. So just so that the disclaimer is out there. Okay. But Obviously you read everything that you have to, because there's no question that, because I think we're of a certain kind. So, I mean, that has to be taken for granted. If you're doing something, that you have to do your research, and then you decide what you want to use and not use. And then that depends on what disclaimer you've put out there, which says that, okay, this is based on true events, inspired by true events, whatever. So I think that, first of all, it depends on what lens you're looking at it from, and what lens you have told people that you're looking at it from. So and there is a honesty to that dishonesty. And so you have to go out there and tell people कि भाई ये हमने जो किया है ये सच नहीं है, ये सच है. So, and I think that when people are watching it also, they're aware that, okay, these people are real, this is, 4 friends are fictional. So I think that those responsibilities are quite obvious, when people are watching it also. And whether you took that responsibility for a digital audience or any audience or a book audience, I think they're aware. I think it's wrong for people to say, oh, now you've made this, now they will think that this is history. No, people have common sense.
Do you think filmmakers or artists or writers are given too much societal responsibility? Like, as though these are the people that narrate what history looks like or what culture looks like. I feel like it's not a nuanced conversation anymore. People feel like it's the absolute of everything. Like, once you show someone a movie, they believe this is reality. Do you think that is necessarily your responsibility?
I don't think there's a single person in this room that actually believes what they see.
This is cerebral audience.
This is an audience that we respect. So, no, I don't. I mean, I've met so many. Everybody's aware. Okay, they may not and so I think that there is something in the news that sells that okay, listen, ये आपने जो बनाया है अभी लोगों को लगेगा ये सच है. ऐसा कुछ है नहीं. I think people have enough intelligence, to understand कि क्या propaganda है, क्या सच है, क्या नहीं है, क्या and where you are within that and what your own belief system of that is. So I think that whole thing has to be taken in the mix, and so it depends on how pre-brainwashed you are in your own belief system.
I'm really glad for the cerebral audience, and I think it extends beyond this room. Certainly here, I live in the USA, and I will say that there, what they see on film, TV, is reality. I mean that not just for the Americans, but for every single Indian American. I've got my daughter who's just moved here. She's Indian American, and I'm from Bombay, and I was freaking out when she moved here. I was like, why are you doing this? You don't get the context. You don't get this. She's like, what's your problem? You're from there. And I'm like, I know, but you think that the reality is what you've seen on, TV, and, that's not the case. But so that does exist. And so I would argue that we do have to be responsible. Americans are very gullible people.
Interesting. I like when you have varying perspectives, because I know you haven't met before.
I'm putting on my boxing gloves right now.
Reenita, your novel explores identity, community, and division. How did the events of the Jallianwala massacre amplify these themes for your characters?
So, Aruna, as I mentioned, is Anglo-Indian, and she falls in love with Ayaz, who is this feisty Muslim law student from Lahore, who has come to Amritsar because this is where the National Congress meetings are taking place, right? You've got your first 2 Congress leaders who are in Amritsar, meeting in Amritsar, exploring this idea of home rule, and they have this relationship which is forbidden because it's interfaith. Log kya sochenge? From his family's perspective, from hers family's perspective, Now she thinks that she can get away with more because, again, and the words, that we have used for Anglo-Indians, I'm just going to go back to that for a second. In the US, I would be cancelled for saying them, but I've been using these words just to express how distasteful they are. Words like half-caste and outcast and pariah and, whatever. And she knows that she's all of those things. But, how does she build this relationship with this guy? And Ayaz strongly believes that the freedom to love Aruna is intertwined with and in sync with and has to happen with the freedom of this. It wasn't a nation then, because it was just about waking up right after, but this land. Right? The freedom of this land. And she is 18 years old. Remember, these are kids. When I started writing this, I thought it was young adult, but then I was later told by the editors that no, this is not young adult. But okay, so she's young and she says, "But what do you mean?" And she's upset because yes, I believe in the idea of home rule, and there's this Gandhiji. He may not have been a Mahatma just yet, but there's this Gandhiji and he's got good ideas, and we're observing these hartals, but why are you paying so much attention to all of this when you should be paying attention to me instead? And Ayaz strongly believes that we cannot be free to love with our interfaith, intercommunal situationship, if this land is not free. So that goes hand in hand with this. It is very important. Now, no spoilers, but the massacre happens and they had this dream to move to this city, Bombay, which they believed was liberal and where they would not be judged and people would not be looking at them with these dismissive eyes. Compared to Amritsar, that's very true. But the massacre happens, and I don't want to sort of spoil the story for anyone who hasn't read it, but we end the book with Aruna in Bombay at the very eve of India's independence, just a few minutes, less than an hour before, the midnight, the clock strikes midnight. And she has been freed because she has come here. However, she has lost so much. And again, I won't go into that. So she arrives in Bombay, but not in exactly the same way with the same dreams, but not necessarily in the same situation that she had imagined that she would transition to Bombay. But that freedom that she has now achieved, that the country now achieves, that the land has achieved, that her lover was very much part and parcel of in fighting for. And she too is a freedom fighter. She wasn't necessarily out there in the traditional sense of the freedom fighter, but she is a freedom fighter. And that brings peace to her, because even though there's an interesting insinuation right at the very end as to why she is Anglo-Indian, and I'm not going to go into that, because now that this country is free, even if she was not able to achieve her love in the way that she wanted, and Ayaz wanted, they have opened that door for so many others. So certainly the circumstances of what happens with the country, with the land, with our land, with the nation, and it becoming a nation state absolutely affects the journeys of my characters.
Very cool. That was chilling. That was really, really
Thank
cool.
you.
Can I just spend a minute talking about the role of the editor? And in doing so, since Shogoto's here, I can then say a couple more nice things about him. Segue into that. I think one of the nice things about Shogoto coming from the publishing world is that the role of the editor, which I've been reading, I just read Ramchandra Guha's book on his editor. And the idea of an editor coming in, I don't know how frustrating it is for an author, but certainly for a filmmaker, when you have somebody who is on the other side, who knows what the role of a publishing editor is, which is what Shobhato's sort of upbringing in a way has been, where he can come to you and tell you, okay, Ram, this is where, and be objective about it, and at the same time be completely straight while being graceful about where you're going, where he feels, and where, from the experience of the audience also, and from an objective view. And I think what I really therefore miss is the role of an editor sometimes. In this case, I didn't, because Shobhato came from the publishing world, and therefore the role of the editor was greatly helpful to me, because we re-edited and re-edited and re-edited. I shoot with 4 to 6 cameras. I use 3% of what I shoot. Okay, so therefore the possibilities of re-editing this are huge. Okay, so if I was to, the kind of footage that is, and I do it purposefully because I feel you've got a lock script, but then you've got to go out there and then you have to rewrite it on the edit table. So this, what was nice in this case was that Shobhato was in a way my editor, along with obviously my editors.
Very cool.
And
actually,
now, just quickly to add to that, that's a very important point. Thank you, Ram, for sharing that, because I think a story really does come together in the editing. Whether it's a book, whether it's a film, whether it's a short, it really comes together in the editing. And I think, again, when it's fiction, that is especially, editing is important whether it's fiction or non-fiction. But with fiction, it's so much more important. I come from a journalist background. I have been a journalist, and we had to be really careful about how we edited news stories to make sure that they didn't turn into fiction, back to that earlier point,
Yeah, but at the same time, like my own editors, was like Abhimanyu, Amit, there was Khushbu, we had an editor from London. So we had a group of some 6 editors who were working at it for over a year, trying to chisel this. And while I'm saying that, there's a voice at the back of my head saying, Ram, just make sure that you also say that you're not being irresponsible to fiction or to fact or to history. That is not the purpose of what I was saying. I think you have to be responsible. Of course you have to be responsible. So
that actually segues into our next question, which is to you, Ram. The web series blends political tension with historical drama. What thematic threads did you focus on to make the story resonate with today's audience?
So look, I'm making a show about that time. I'm not making a show about this time. If I was to make a show about this time, then I would make a show about this time. So in my head, the show that I'm making is racism, colonialism, and what we went through in our freedom struggle. And therefore, I'm not making any commentary about what we are today or not today, etc. My entire pain point was coming from an experience that I had, an upbringing that I have had, an education that I've had, and I was looking at it purely from that lens.
Interesting, because when you said racism, colonialism, and our struggle for freedom, it sounded like 2025. Actually. But
so in cricket, they say, well left.
Spot on.
Yeah, no.
Reenita, over to you. What kind of research or personal reflection went into writing about such a politically and emotionally charged event from India's colonial past?
Oh my gosh, research was just what this is all about. So like I had said earlier, I had the story in my head, but it coming together required in-depth research. And I started out with General Dyer's court trial transcript.
Whoa.
That was my starting point.
By the way, guys, it's 400, 500 pages of this, which is on the net. Please read it. It is chilling.
Yeah.
Okay. That entire archival material is chilling.
Yeah, absolutely. And you masterfully go into that in your show. in my very original manuscript, I actually had excerpts from the trial in the story that was cut out, editing, right?
Okay. Shogoto didn't cut that out.
Yeah, Shogoto didn't.
From the show.
But you know, to understand, right around 2019, at the 100th year anniversary, there was suddenly a lot of nonfiction released, so the research actually, frankly, became easier. There were very few people left who I could actually talk to who were descendants of somebody who had been alive at the time. Actually alive at the time, I couldn't find anybody. But UC Berkeley, so I live sometimes in Northern California, sometimes in Southern California, but UC Berkeley has a wealth of information, as do some of the other libraries in the US, but UC Berkeley in particular, because California was actually the first place that Indian immigrants actually went to in the US in the very late 1800s and early 1900s. So a lot of this has been documented. Of course, it's very annoying the way you have to do the research, because you have to book time, go into the library, sit there, read there, and then leave. You cannot check out anything. The stuff is not digitized. You're not allowed to take pictures. They give you they've got a little bit of information on tapes like cassettes, which, they give you these really old-fashioned headphones and whatever. Anyway, so yeah, the research was intense, but it had to be done, because in order to sort of really thread together this story, it's a nightmare. I mean, quick segue into sort of my next book that's coming out. Not that that's a topic, but it's my late father's memoirs, and it's also a piece of history which is very important to India, because it's not documented. And when I did that research, it was even more of a nightmare, because you get a snippet of this, a snippet of that, and I was like, how do you piece this together? And I remember asking my father when he was still alive, he's like, well, that's not my problem, that's what you do, So it was like that with this as well.
Tell us a line about the book. No, come on, now that you've told us, tell us a line about the next book.
A line about the next book?
Yeah.
Okay. The next book...
Since she's told it to me, and it is fascinating, so...
It is fascinating. I'm biased. It's called Ace of Blades. It is about the pioneer of India's razor blade industry. This is my late father, R.K. Malhotra, who literally hand-built with his two hands, I kid you not, the entire industry. And I say the industry and not just his business, because every other player in the industry he brought in. So it's fascinating, it's extremely dysfunctional, it is conflict-ridden all the way. Jayco is publishing it. I had some other publishers who were interested, and I have to share this. They said, I used to work for Bloomberg, and they said to me, this is a business book, but it seems very much like a Bollywood story. So can you make it more like a business report? And I was like, absolutely not. They're like, but it's like a Bollywood story. I was like, you don't know my life. Actually, this is my father's life. So this is Succession meets The Crown, the Indian version.
But this is the man who brought Topaz, right?
Topaz Blades.
Yeah.
Some very important things happened in the year 1970. Topaz was born. I was born. We were both born that year. And that entire decade, the 70s, was really the Topaz decade, which once Topaz died, if you will, it was Supermax. And these are his blades, these are his brands, these are his babies. That's all he cared about, pretty much. It's a fascinating story, and I would love every single one of you here to read it. Sorry, that was not supposed to be book promo, but thank you, Ram.
No, but it was a nice. Good to know, and also, who knows? Somebody over here is going to make it into a movie or a series or something. So it's good for you to speak it.
Yes, absolutely. And it's very important. I just will say one more thing. It's a coming of age story on 3 levels, because it was a coming of age story for the protagonist, the character himself. It's a coming of age story for India's FMCG industry, because post-independence, they really didn't know how to deal with FMCG goods. So they said, okay, you guys run it, but we'll control you through the license Raj. And it's a coming of age story, frankly, for every single Indian man who shaved with those products. And what does a man do when he comes of age? He shaves. So,
for those who don't know, FMCG is fast-moving consumer goods.
sorry, thank you.
Since I come from advertising, I know that.
I actually had a different question for both of you, a different conclusive question for both of you, but I'm actually going to ask you the same question and open it up and see what you both have to say. But both these lenses had a lot of obviously research that backed it up and got it to the stage of bringing it into our society consciousness. Did that impact your individual consciousness in any way? Was it through the lens of patriotism or just hating the British? I mean, because research does very strange things to the human brain, which is that I think it makes us sort of connect to things and resonate with things that we never were around for. But a lot of the times when you're researching something, you have the ability to experience it in many ways, especially if it was the experience of all of our collective ancestors.
You want me to go first? Okay, so that you have time to think about
No. I'm just,
Um,
otherwise they'll think that again I've sort of being a man.
Monopolize.
I'm being a man.
Mansplaining? Okay.
Yeah.
So mansplaining, actually starting right there, the research really did impact my consciousness in terms of really understanding how much of our history is mansplained. Mansplained history, mansplained present.
It should be called herstory, okay?
Yes,
it should not be
history.
called
Exactly,
history
because
to begin with.
Yes, his history comes from his story. No, he's absolutely right. It's never her story. It's never her story, whatever. So it really does start with that. And I grew up in this kind of confused situation. I'm going to say it. I'm going to put it on the table. I've got my mother here, my school teacher here, and these were my two worlds, right? So at home, I definitely grew up in a situation but there were positives of the colonial rule, and, they taught us how to build the railways, and you've heard all this. And let's not go into whether that's true or not true, and, anyway, that's not even how I wanted to say it. But, so there was that, Whereas in school, we were being taught the patriotic songs and the Blue Civics book and Vatan ki raah mein, Vatan ki naujawan, all this kind of stuff. So, I didn't have to do the research to understand how much I did not like this foreign race ruling me. Because in many ways, it kind of reminded me of what happens in my household, where women are just not really taken very seriously, and the girls and the daughters, and chalo unko thoda sa just jewelry de do, shadi karwa aur ho jayega. It's not that necessary for you to be educated. It's not that necessary for you to know too much, say too much, etc. And in doing the research, these were the struggles of the people, of the women of Amritsar. But where were they? They're nowhere in the historical facts. And it just really struck me that through this lens, and it's interesting because with many of my books, I've got these Punjabi women, and it didn't start out that way, but it wasn't like I was meaning to write about these Punjabi women. It's just that it's happened that way. They all have mother issues. They all have daughter issues. They're all, extremely feisty. We were talking about the beta male the other day, and these are all these alpha women.
It's not called the beta male. It's called the beta male.
Beta male, yes. But these are the alpha women. They're feisty. They're trying to escape a situation that is suffocating them in some way or the other. And with everything that was happening when I researched that period of history, I found that was happening on a macro level as well. So did it affect my consciousness? Yes, it affected my consciousness, because it is very important for me to bring these stories, all my stories, to audiences through the eyes of certainly women, but also those who are not the victors, as we said earlier. And that is a thread that just becomes stronger and stronger.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we have two scenes in the series. One is when Michael O'Dwyer goes and Lieutenant Governor Michael O'Dwyer goes and teaches an Indian man how to eat with a fork and knife. And he says, "Haath se nahi khana hai, kata churi se khana, kaise sikhaya." So this was one scene, and the other is a scene where he speaks about an elephant. Again, Michael O'Dwyer speaks about an elephant, and he says that the elephant has been tied by a small rope, but the elephant does not know that it's been tied by a small rope, because, and we've all heard that story, where the elephant doesn't know it's been tied by a small rope, but because it was tied from a child with that thin rope, it now doesn't feel like it can escape. And so he talks about it like as if that is India, that we don't know that we can escape. So when none of this is actually part of your question or about the research that we did, but it's interesting. So, but one of the things that obviously I'm talking about is what they call as the white man's burden. And both these scenes are actually about the idea that they told us that they had a white man's burden to civilize us. And they spun it so well and in such a gentlemanly way. And then they came and then they looted us and they like massacred us and they did all of this. But they did this thinking that, no, acha, ye to aapka burden hai bhai. Okay, it was never the brown man's burden. It was always the white man's burden.
Yeah.
And obviously a poem written by Rudyard Kipling,
Yeah.
Though not about British people, it was written about the Americas and all the rest of that, but still. So to go back to how did research affect me, I think really when you read, like I was saying, when you read what General Dyer said in the commission about the fact that he was perfectly okay going out there and he would have got the armored car in there and all of that. It's all there in the public domain and you can read it like it's just like a Google click away. But I think that when you read that, that's what really shakes you. So.
Yeah, and when he says, again, you read it in that court transcript, that he does not regret for a second. I think he repeats that several times.
And he says, and then he says, so the person in the commission asks him, says, so you could have just given a warning, right? You could have just told these people, can you please leave, and given them a warning. And he said, no, if I gave them a warning, I would have made a fool of myself. And they would have laughed at me if I'd just given them a warning, because that is the other thing that actually, there's a short story again, I think by, I've forgotten who it's by, but it's by one of these Odin types. And so again, it's a story which is about a man who's been called, there's an elephant which is running amok in the bazaar. It's a story set in Burma. And then what happens is that the British officer is called to come and shoot the elephant. By the time he gets to the market, the elephant is fine. The elephant is saying, I am now so the British man tells the natives, he says, listen, the elephant doesn't seem to be rogue anymore. Uska jo must, because an elephant can go must. Now it's no longer must. But then he looks at all the Indians and he says, now I'm going to have to shoot the elephant, because if I don't shoot the elephant, then these people will laugh at me.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's what General Dyer felt, that if I didn't shoot the people at Jallianwala Bagh, then the others would laugh at me. I mean, that is so, sort of, when you even read that, what kind of mindset is that? So
It's called Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell.
George Orwell. It's an essay. No, but it's about the officer in Burma. Correct, yeah. Exactly. So thank you. George Orwell. It was not W.H. Odin.
I don't need to have an inherent bias about gender, because I would like to believe that I don't. But it just sounds like a terrible case of male ego to me. Very unfortunate that that's the reason that thousands of people had to die. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. This has been a very compelling, very engaging conversation.
Am I going to stop this conversation
I'm not
on
gonna-
male ego? We can't stop this conversation on Jallianwala Bagh on male ego.
The next question, what I'd like to ask you is, what is your, whether this is an outcome of your research or your personal, just your personal experiences of life, what is your definition and ultimate embodiment of freedom?
Who are you asking?
You first.
No, you first. I went first last time.
No, let's get some
that
some
is-
female ego in here.
No, but this is my definition of freedom is that I get to decide who goes first.
Oh. Freedom to do what? Right? And I think that's really what you're asking, right? Because if one looks at the notion of freedom, which obviously for like Amita's father, for instance, was a freedom fighter. Okay, and so that notion, when you're trying to get freedom for your country, is a notion that we have no real direct idea of. And in our case, at least, and I'd like to just restrict my answer actually because that answer is so fast and so sometimes not graspable, that I'd rather just speak about it from the waking of a nation's point of view, which is that it's dedicated to our parents, it's dedicated to Amita's father, who was actively involved in the freedom struggle. It's dedicated to my father, who was also the person who had all those books around me, which is like, which are partly philosophical, partly spiritual, partly got to do with our Hindu and, because I am Hindu. And so there was all of this that surrounds you. And I think that the freedom that I certainly got was the freedom to read. And I think that's a big freedom to have. So, yeah.
That is a big freedom. My ultimate definition of freedom, this is a tough question because for me it's about just living life on your own terms, which is something, to be perfectly honest, Ritika, I've had to struggle to get there. I did not grow up in a situation where I could live the life that I wanted to live and define my future on my own terms. There was a path that was set that I did not adhere to and ran away from and broke away from, and anyway.
I suppose what you're saying is that freedom has to be earned and has to be fought for and has to be pushed.
Yeah.
Freedom is not given.
Correct. I mean,
Yeah.
I like the word earned because
Yeah.
oftentimes when you use the word fight, that just has a very aggressive sort of connotation to it. But I really think that, and for me, living life on my own terms means many things. Now, I mean, for example, I am a storyteller, and when you write books or screenplays, I'm always told, stay in your lane. If you're writing comedy, stick to comedy. Writing young adult, stick to young adult. If you're, But you know what? I'm not going to do that because I have these different stories to tell. So when people ask me what is my genre, either in the screenwriting world or in the book world, constantly, what is your genre? And it's taken me a while, but I say I write stories that reflect the South Asian experience.
Which is a thali.
It is a thali.
Which is not plated food.
Absolutely. And the kotoris, my kotoris, are YA and fantasy and romance and literary fiction. So why the heck not?
Yeah.
There is just a beautiful image that comes to mind. 2 songs. I'm big on music, all kinds of music. There was a Lata Mangeshkar song, I totally forget what it's called, but it's about this chidiya in a pinjra. And she's saying Aja Re, and she's opening the cage and to let the chidiya fly away. Same theme, different context. Elton John, Skyline Pigeon, dreaming of the ocean, open, waiting for the day. And that's it. It's about spreading your wings and flying away from those chains that constrain you. You know, I always say, whatever it might be, my free spirit cannot be unleashed. That to me is freedom.
Thank you guys.
Okay, that's a better note to end this on, huh?
And male ego,
Rather than male ego, yaar.
we'll just let the male speak.
We were just talking about beta male. When did it become alpha male?
Thank you guys. Thank you so much for being here. We will close this conversation now. Obviously, welcome to hang out and welcome to talk to these two wonderful people and ask them as many questions as you like first.
And we have books, so please come and explore the books.
And we have subscriptions from Sony Live. Please subscribe to Sony Live and watch the show.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
For being such a great audience. And please, a special thanks to Ritika.
Huge thanks to
who's
Ritika.
been wonderful with. Actually, those questions were genuinely fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, you made it interesting, you made it exciting, and we were happy to have answered those. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
All right.
And for dealing with all the logistical nightmares. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, 1 minute. Yes, please, ma'am.
Should I give you a mic?
I look a fool if I don't. And do you know this kind of narcissism? The British people supported
Yes, they did. Yeah.
that he was right.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Did you know that?
I know that. Yeah.
And that is the sadness of the world.
Agreed. No, absolutely.
This
Yeah.
should be also highlighted to people.
We have done that in the show.
People totally supported that.
Yeah. No question.
Yeah.
No, I agree. That's something which was shocking. By the way.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Thank you, my dear.
Really,
Thank
really
you. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
so glad that
Yes.
you